The 80s had the General. The 90s had John Gilligan. In the noughties, it was the reign of Martin Marlowe Hyland. His was a familiar path with success and power, and then the recklessness. He had to go, because with him, an innocent young man doing an honest day's work died. Crime World presents Caught in the Crossfire, the unsolved murders of coke kingpin Marlowe Hyland and innocent Anthony Campbell. Available now on all podcast platforms. Tanya, thanks so much for coming on, and I've been wanting to talk to you for a while in relation to this case because you're very close to it and you've covered it extensively from the beginning. The sentence hearing in relation to the Katie Simpson murder the other day for 3 women who were caught up in this as such as part of a cover-up for Jonathan Creswell. My big takeaway from it was how Creswell literally almost got away with murder. So maybe take us back to what happened and what he was doing in the months after Katie Simpson's death.
In the months and weeks after, he was the chief mourner. He was very much in control of the situation. The wake and funeral were quite disturbing, especially for people like myself who realised there was much more to it. But he carried on as normal. There was no break of pace. He was out competing. He was competing. Katie was buried on a Thursday, and he was competing again on the Saturday. When it came for the month's mind of Katie's month's mind, he was away selling horses in Gore's Bridge. Nothing changed. He carried on as normal, as did everyone around him. There was an element of, every so often you would see a post would come up on his account as well, where he was promoting International World Suicide Prevention Day. And he was posting this in Speak Out. They were running fundraisers for suicide awareness, and Johnny was heavily involved in those. And the women involved were donating to these. We have the records of that. As each one donated, we were able to catch who was doing what on Facebook and who had donated. So it really, you began to question yourself, have I got it wrong? Mm-hmm. Because my head wasn't adding up. But I began to feel, well, surely by now, somebody is going to swing in and say, right, just a minute, we need to have a chat here. But it didn't happen. It simply did not happen.
We'll come back to that because it's a very interesting statement to make, given there's a police investigation going on, how people like yourself, a journalist, knew there was more to it than certainly was emerging as the causes and reasons for her death. But to say, I suppose, Jill Robinson, 42, from Blackfort Road in Omagh, who admitted perverting the course of justice. Hayley Robb from Weaver's Meadow in Banbridge, County Down, admitted 2 charges of perverting the course of justice and withholding information. And Rose de Montmorency Wright from Craig Ganlett Road in Newton Ards, County Down, admitted withholding information. Now, they're the 3 women whose sentence hearing was in Derry in recent weeks, and all 3 of them pleaded guilty on the basis that they did not know or believe that Creswell had murdered or killed Katie. They believed that he had caused her bodily harm. He had attacked her basically before she committed suicide. And that's how they've accepted their guilt. But go back there to your own statement that, during the funeral, he was the chief mourner, and you found it jaw-dropping that nobody was shouting, there's more to this. So Katie Simpson was taken to hospital by Jonathan Creswell in August of 2020. And he presented saying that he had found her having tried to commit suicide, and she died in the days later, if I'm right. Now, he, in the meantime, was covering up what he admitted to these 3 women and to others was an attack on Katie. And he didn't want to be he didn't want that to come out in light of her supposed suicide. How did you realise there was more to this story? And how did you know about Creswell? How did you know about his background? And what were the red flags to you that possibly he could be telling lies and that actually he could have killed her?
Well, the first time I encountered Jonathan Creswell was when he was overnight charged to Dungannon Court in 2009 for attacking his previous partner, Abby Lyle. That was a particularly brutal and frightening domestic violence attack. And the beauty of that one was, if there is a beauty in it, the judge in that particular court had made it his campaign of his tenure that he was clamping down on domestic violence. So every time a domestic violence came in, press would come in en masse because we knew we'd get comments from him about this kind of behaviour. I did not expect what came out. Now, on that bail hearing, all the facts were opened as they knew it. And in that, there was a strangulation. There was a woman taken over the border in a car, dragged out of the car, badly beaten in the process of being in the car, and then taken back to his home and kept there for a time. I would suggest probably till bruises died down. But there were links. There was the crossing of the border. There was the contention of the domestic element. And there was the propensity for strangulation. Now, at this point, he's dealt with a year later, but throughout that entire time, Jonathan Creswell is being ably supported by his group of women. And they were saying, no, she's the one with the issues. She's been the type to lie down, roll around, and not said anything that wasn't said in court. Roll around, punch herself about, and Johnny was the saviour.
And was that evidence given in that court case in 2009? Oh, yeah. Okay. These women came and gave evidence sort of on his behalf to say that this woman had done this to herself.
In fact, they wanted to give more evidence to the police, but the police were saying, but hold on, we don't act for the offender or the alleged offender. We act for a victim. So they weren't there at the time, so they weren't veracity witnesses. But on the other hand, they had then decided they went to his lawyer and gave statements officially. Now, as it was, he denied it right up to the point the jury was sworn, and then he changed his plea. So those statements never made it out, but we know of them because they were discussed openly in court. So fast forward to 2020, and I get a phone call telling me that Katie's in hospital having tried to hang herself, but the people who contacted me were struggling badly with this, very, very badly. And I didn't know at this point that Katie had any connection whatsoever with Creswell. But it's distinct in my head that I was told, you may have heard of this man. He once threatened to put his partner in a bath of bleach. That's the exact point. And I knew it was Creswell.
Tanya, these were people, they were calling you as a reporter to say, you know, that this girl has gone to hospital. She's a show jumper, of course. She's well known within the equestrian world up there. And that people were certainly saying they were a little bit concerned that, you know, all wasn't as it seemed.
Yes, there were a number of people who knew Katie extremely well. They were very close to her. And they were not, this wasn't sitting with them. And it just wasn't sitting with them right at all. But the minute I heard hanged herself, which was a throat constriction, I then find out that Jonathan Creswell is in the mix as the partner of her sister Christina, and that she had been staying up with them and working for them. And then there's a domestic angle there automatically because there's a connection through Christina. And all of a sudden it started to fit. So that was the third she was admitted. I was informed on the morning of the 4th, and I began contacting police that day. And more or less every day thereafter, even after she died, I was still ringing Derry police, and nobody was ringing me back.
And you were ringing because, you know, outside your sort of, I suppose, your journalism, you really felt that people around her were concerned that, I mean, surely the police knew of Jonathan Creswell's background themselves. They realised that he was the one who presented her to the hospital, and he was really the one who found her, supposedly having attempted suicide, and obviously she died in the days later. So were the police not reacting to that, or did you believe that they didn't know?
They certainly didn't react to it, whether they knew or not. At one point they said, that's none of my business. And at one stage, an officer actually said to me, you know, once he sussed out how I knew him, because he kept saying to me, and how do you know this man? And I covered him in court, and that's where I shot myself in the foot. Because he said, oh, you're a reporter. With an element of disdain.
Mm-hmm.
And he said, you would really be better going through the press office. And at this stage, I'm by now almost screaming down the phone, you want me to go through the press office to give you information on a potential crime? So I was yet again told the investigating officer would contact me. They didn't. Mm-hmm. There was no investigation at that point. Yes, she had died in unexpected circumstances, but piecing together the information that we've got, despite being told virtually every day of his past, and as I said, I was told that was none of my business. I later discovered that was raised, and it was pointed out it didn't happen in our jurisdiction. So, which is okay. The police areas up here are divided into divisions. Mm-hmm. It still was irrelevant on his record. But it was only with the day he was charged to court, that I got the full detail of her being taken over the border, and all those things coming back in, same thing over again, all ignored.
So bring us back to the time, and I think it takes a bit longer for funerals to happen when, it's an when somebody dies in such circumstances. Presumably there was, an inquest into her death at the hospital, and it took probably a week or two, did it, for the funeral to happen?
Well, Katie passed away in the early hours of the 9th of August. Postmortem, as we understand it, was the Monday or the Tuesday, and she was released to her family on the Tuesday night or Tuesday evening. Mm-hmm. Now, that's the bit that we were hoping was going to find out that something wasn't right. And no, not an issue. Case closed, suicide, well, as a result of suicide. And Katie was released. A very difficult time for all of us who were trying to raise the alarm. It was very difficult in the sense that not only was Creswell front and centre of the entire proceedings, the women were too. And they were all there. They were all around him, guarding, checking, being loyal, I suppose they would say it as. But it was a very, very bizarre and actually very distressing, because you kept thinking, any minute now the police are going to come in here and stop this. But it never happened. And I think the most sickening point was that women connected to this carried Katie's coffin, and Creswell also was one of 4 who carried her coffin to her grave. And at that point, a lot of us just had to go. We just couldn't watch it anymore.
And when you're coming at this, are you a journalist, or do you have personal knowledge of these people yourself at the same time? Are you operating because people have come to you and given you their information and told you their fears, or do you have a connection as well?
I only in the sense that people came to me about it. And yes, I would have known of Katie through other people, through friends, nearby neighbours, various things like that. Up until all that point, I was trying to support them because they would make me, please do that. And I was trying, and it gutted me every night would pass and nobody would have contacted me. But unfortunately, no matter how I pushed, they wouldn't listen. So I resorted to, I didn't at any stage go journalist really, except to say how I knew the previous. I didn't go back to being a journalist until I started emailing the press office by about the November, simply asking straightforward questions like, why were detectives not brought in? And they wouldn't answer, all blind. And then there came a point, I think it was December, that something happened. I think between one thing and another, we just weren't going to let go. It was that simple. And I ramped it up a bit and said, look, if you don't answer these questions, I'm going to publish them. And that was the first I got a note to say, hold on now, there might be, we can't comment directly on that. Mm-hmm. And I thought, oh, that's slightly different. And then I was told there would be movement in the new year. And indeed there was. and credit where it's due, the new team took over, removed it from the original investigation team and hit the ground running.
Okay.
But
you talk about them hitting the ground running, they're on the back foot, because the months have passed and some evidence surely, would have been buried as such with Katie at that point. The post-mortem, the original post-mortem from the hospital, surely it's that point. I mean, look, we know it from being crime journalists, but we also see it on the TV and dramas. It's at that point when a post-mortem, when a doctor says something strange has happened here. What did the post-mortem state was the cause of death, and why did that really sort of shut down any original investigation?
Well, if I can quote back to the High Court bail application for Mr. Creswell, which was possibly one of the most disturbing I have ever encountered, because the post-mortem found possible hanging. And in that, opening the prosecution case, it was stated that was largely based on what Mr. Creswell told police, which was then passed to the pathologist. Now, the judge hearing that was heavily critical. And he said, well, that shouldn't have been signed off. I got the transcript from High Court and it's a shocking read. And yet we're still in a bit of a debate. The policing board are saying it was a forensic examination. We're hearing from other sources it wasn't a full forensic examination, but nobody's giving us a direct answer. And it was attended by police, but it was a sudden and unexpected death. So someone did have to be there. Mm-hmm. But whatever it was, all doors closed again. So Katie was a suicide and things moved on. That was it. And it was only when a second pathologist was brought in from the Home Office and reviewed all the circumstances that he said, hold on, this is not quite right. And I can tell you, when I was informed of that, I think I actually broke down and cried because I couldn't believe that somebody somewhere had spotted the flaw.
Mm. And the flaw being that possibly a hanging, but there were marks we heard during the sentence hearing of the three women on her body and bruising on her legs and her inner thigh, etc. And that, I think, Creswell and some of the women had, during their statements to police, stated that she'd had an accident on a horse. There was some talk of that she'd been trampled by a horse, or she'd had a fall off the horse. Now, again, Creswell would have been the one who gave that information in the first place when he presented her body to the hospital.
He did. He also then, if you recall, they took a drive. I think Katie was being assessed, and there was Creswell and Christina, Katie's sister, and Hayley and Jill. Rose was not party to this conversation. And they all got into a car and drove for a bit just to cool off, I suppose, where Creswell breaks down. And then he said, you think I did this, don't you? And they were, no, not at all. That was exactly the way Creswell, or the prosecution set it out, that Jill had said, no, of course not. We don't believe you did this. But he had already admitted, at least to Hayley, that he had beaten Katie, or as she put it, that he'd given her a hiding the night before. Mm-hmm. And knowing that she's bruised from that, and quite badly bruised, as you heard yourself, he proceeds to tell the three of them, if anyone asks at the hospital, I'm going to say she was trampled by the horse. So that became the position. Mm. And that was emphasised, overemphasised. And then as time went on, there was a continual push. After Katie passed away, the continual push was that Katie was in a dark place. This is all we were getting. Katie was in a very dark place. Absolute nonsense. And that has now been proved. And I think that alone was vindication, that Katie did not end up where she is by her own hand. Mm-hmm. But that was the story they were content to stand over. I'm reserving judgment on whether they really knew. There does seem to be some level of I think the words that the PPS use of conspiracy. But it wasn't a 24-hour or a 1 week thing. This went on for months.
Mm-hmm.
And they, at some point, must have been saying to themselves, this isn't right. But they didn't do anything about it.
It's a very disturbing case on many levels. And, you know, it remains to be seen. The original investigation team obviously believed what Creswell had to say and the explanations he gave, and believed totally that Katie Simpson died at her own hand. Was that an incompetence, given his background?
I think Creswell could certainly be very plausible. But that alone is an alarm bell in a domestic situation when the person who presents is doing all the talking. Obviously, of course, Katie couldn't speak this time. But you've got to bear in mind, Katie had 18 hospital admissions in the 2 years before her death. That came out at High Court. And in all instances, she'd fallen off a horse. All of them. And in the majority of instances, Creswell was with her. And then he would present her at hospital with whatever injuries. So that alone would have been on the medical records to say this girl keeps, I've checked with the trust. There are policies in place for potential domestic situations, but he's doing all the talking. And that was always Creswell's thing. He was a good talker. He was convincing because he was plausible. And whether it's that or apathy or it just looked the way he was saying it, I don't know. But to me, when a girl presents near, probably, if not dead, they managed to restart her heart, but let's be honest, it was never going to be a good outcome. And she presents at that level, you're looking at an entirely different thing to, a potential minor incident. This was the worst crime that you could commit. And that's what has always sickened me, was this 21-year-old girl's life not worth looking into? And the circumstances of her death. That's always been my problem. Mm-hmm. And then are there any more like this? Is it all just a slam dunk, close the case, walk away, if what you're being told just happens to fit?
And you also sort of got a sense now of what it must feel like for people out there who we speak to as journalists who are, hammering down doors in cases of deaths that they don't believe they've been processed properly. They do believe that, I'm sure you have spoken to people before who don't believe their loved ones committed suicide, that there was more to it, and they're getting nowhere about having an investigation reopening. As a journalist, usually you have a certain amount of power that if you ask a question in relation to that, you certainly get an answer, or you certainly, in the normal course of events, investigators will make sure they've dotted their I's and crossed their T's. If the media begin to start scratching around a thing, and they will often relook at a situation in that case. But in your case, there was a huge frustration there. Now, eventually, obviously, this investigation did get reopened, and the reason for Katie Simpson's death was uncovered. Creswell, of course, was facing trial and was just a few days into the trial when he took his own life. But it must have been an extremely bizarre situation for you to find yourself in.
It was very bizarre. As I said earlier there, I didn't come at it as a journalist to begin with, but I turned to that. And even at that, I wasn't getting the answers. It really was a campaign of just keeping on going, because we could not get anybody to listen. And whenever you're not just guessing, but you're actually saying, was his previous taken into account? Was his propensity for strangulation? The living arrangements were all wrong. Everything about this case just jumped out. And then, in a rather startling twist, you have these women coming forward to shepherd him through this situation. Some involved with him, some not, some very close to him, obviously fiercely loyal to him. But it was just all wrong. At least I saw it as all wrong, and I'm sure I'm not one. I couldn't have been. But why it was swept away, at first I thought perhaps were mistakes made, and it was better to just leave things as they were. But instead of that, all this information gets piled onto them. And no, nothing is done. It's only December when we've probably irritated them so much they thought we better do something here just to make it even look right. And suddenly things are looked at again. But as to how that came about, that's one for the PSNI to answer.
You know, and we'll keep trying to find those answers as the time goes on with this case, because there's a lot to untangle here, I think. Now, that new investigation team, by, I think, the April of 2021, that's only 4 months into their investigation, were able to charge Jonathan Creswell. And he was released on bail, was it in the June?
He was arrested on the 2nd of March and in court on the 6th.
Right.
Where he was refused. And then he went for bail at the end of that month, and all sorts of problems occurred. The co-accused, Jill Robinson, immediately comes forward, puts up bail. And others came forward, we just believe in him so strongly. And then somewhere along the line, Jill pulled out because it was disclosed in court that she had put up bail. And of course, it made the papers. And Jill said she was getting harassed and intimidated, so she had to withdraw, as did a number of others. But he eventually got bail. He eventually got high court bail, and very, very strict terms. But I would still have concerns over how he got bail, given the issues within the case where he had control of Katie's phone. This is not a man who was afraid to withhold information or adjust things. To withhold that phone, which had so much evidence in it, was a form of perverting. Whether that was going to come out as a charge, I never know, but it was all disclosed that he had retained it. He had opened it. He turned the phone on while she was in intensive care. And then 2 weeks after that, it was activated again. So he was obviously checking. So anybody who is prepared to go to lengths like that to keep themselves just under the radar or keep others under the radar, to me, is a very dangerous individual. And I suspect there probably was an element of control. There certainly was in his first relationship that he got to court over. So why he got bail, I will never know, because I suspect it was because so much detail was lost because of that botched first investigation. Although it wasn't an investigation, to be honest. I suspect it was from that point, and they had to give him the benefit of the doubt. But again, we'll never know.
So what do we know about Jonathan Creswell and his background, what he was doing around the time of Katie Simpson's murder, and his relationship with those other women? What do we know about him? Well,
Jonathan Creswell would have been a showjumper and good at his job as a child or a young person. You know, he was very capable in that. But as years go on, and as it happens with all of us, you move on to different aspects of the horse world. And he began moving into buying in horses, training them up, schooling them, and selling them on. Nothing wrong with that. But it was always going to be horses. So he first encountered Katie when he worked in Tynan, in stables in Tynan in County Armagh. Katie lived quite close to the stables at that point, her and her sister, Christina. And after a time, everybody in that area at some point was in the stables, whether it was to work or walk about or whatever. And as children, they would have been looking at the horses in awe. It's only natural. So then he begins a relationship with Christina. Now, at the same time, the years cross over with his relationship with Abigail Lyle. And somewhere in the mix as well is Hayley, because she disclosed that she had been with him from she was about 18 or 19, 10 years before his arrest. That ties in as well. So he's sexually involved with quite a number of women. at the same time.
And he's in his early 20s, Tanya, is that right?
When he was prosecuted for Abby's case, he was 21.
Mm.
And when he was jailed, I think he was 22, coming possibly approaching 23. So he then moves away. He comes back and he's a hero's welcome back into the area. And by this stage, Christina is now his number one. And she's living with him and very contented working together. But at some point, Creswell begins to take an interest in Katie. Again, all this came out in court. And there was an element of, she would have only been about 9 or 10 at this point, and he's encouraging her. He's bringing her to the stables. He wants her there all the time. And while we probably never get the full facts of what actually went on, it is quite clear, looking back, and according to what police believe, there was sexual abuse going on. She was groomed, quite clearly groomed. And this was life. This was life. At 16, they then move away. Johnny and Christina move away to Donegal and start working in stables there. And at 16, Katie is informed she's going down to live with them and work with them. But at some point, that went sour. And Katie she would come home to Armagh, hook up with her friends. But at some point, Katie ran away to Scotland, having got a job with Rayshard and Ayr. And she just thrived. The people she worked with loved her. She was doing very, very well. She was getting home every other weekend and she'd see her friends on the boat. Somebody would pick her up, somebody would leave her back. And then it became clear that there were elements of, no, come back to us. And it was described to me by a very, very, very nice man who knew the whole setup and told Katie, keep going to Scotland, it's your way forward. He was very encouraging with her. But he said he watched her. She spent about a week and a half working locally for Johnny and Christina. And he said over that week, he watched her smile disappear. And that really, really impacted with me. And he said everybody was trying to get her to come away. But no, her place was where she was sent. And that's whenever, again, back to Donegal, latterly then on to Derry. He had bought ground in Derry and was setting up his own yard, as most people in that industry do. And this is where everything started to go wrong, was in Derry. And Katie, by this stage, has met Shane McCloskey through the work. Shane's keen. Katie likes him. Not sure where she's going with this or not, because to our understanding, she's 21 and she'd never had a boyfriend. So she would have had a group of friends. And when Shane wants to sort of say a wee bit more of her or ask her out, I'll have to ask Johnny. So there was an element of control. And then the rest is what we do know, except we don't know what happened exactly between going back to the house that night after she has been beaten.
And of course, just to explain for anybody who hasn't, kept a close eye on this, but she has gone out for a night, I think, with Shane. She's sort of gone on a date, has she? And somebody has said to Johnny that he was seen leaving a house the following morning where Katie was. So Johnny has been informed that they've spent a night together. And he seems to fly into this rage.
He does. Shane, despite what was said, there was a slight change to that. Shane, they both left around about 6 o'clock in the morning in separate cars. Katie was heading to a competition. Shane was going back home to Derry. But at some point along the way to Derry, his ex-partner spotted him and where's he going this early in the morning? And immediately contacted Johnny, who decides to start interrogating Katie. And the texts, you heard them, you ring me now. So Katie is now heading towards the show and becoming very, very concerned, and begins to concoct a story because he's going to question her. She knows that, and she needs Shane's backup. And there was going to come a point when he was going to tackle Shane as well, obviously. But Katie then, well, we know the rest. She goes show jumping that day, does extremely well as usual. She's put into a lorry with Johnny, who instructs Rose, the co-accused Rose, to drive Katie's car back home. And don't forget, Rose is living with them too. And he takes Katie to drop off the horses in Strabane, and he drives her over into Lifford. And what happens between there and when they get back to the house in Gortnessy Meadows that night is only able to be tracked from phones and CCTV, but we don't know the full detail. More importantly, she is still alive, albeit probably very shaken up and beaten. But what happened between 12:20 the morning of the 3rd of August, and until he presented her to an ambulance crew, we do not know. But Katie's breathing was cut off. And as you heard the prosecutor say, it is our belief Creswell throttled her. And that had to have happened at some stage between him bringing her into the house that night and then the next morning. But the two people who know the full answers to that are both now dead.
And Tanya, just to, because I was a little bit confused about that, who was in the car when they were going over the border and why. So he was on his own with Katie and he drove her across the border and back, which, as you say, rings back to the previous incident of domestic violence in 2009 when he did similar. We've no idea what happened in the car that, but they arrived back, and I think it was it Rose de Montmorency, right? Did she say she saw them when they came in that night and that Katie was in good form?
That is her statement. She said that Katie came in and was laughing, and she made a joke about, I fell off the horse, and rolled her eyes. So she's saying she spoke to her that night, and she also said she spoke to her the next morning.
Bringing her a cup of tea.
Brought her a cup of tea, and she said, I'm not going to work today. And as you heard, she said that was a bit unusual for Katie, but didn't think there was anything major about it. And I don't know. That is her statement. But whether Katie, I can't make up my mind about the situation of speaking that morning or not. I'd say she probably did speak to her the night before, but I don't think it was happy-go-lucky. And the fact that Katie presents at hospital in some of the clothes that she was wearing the day before, minus her jodhpurs, she was still in her show jumping gear the following day. So it's not like anybody came in and got into the pajamas and got into bed. It wasn't like that.
And Rose is the youngest of the women there that have pleaded guilty in relation to withholding this information. She's 22 years of age. Her admission is that she knew that Jonathan Creswell had attacked Katie, but she didn't give that information to the police when she was questioned.
Yeah, that's right.
And again, she has said that she did not know or believe that Creswell had ever murdered or killed Katie, just that he'd caused her this actual bodily harm. They've sort of explained it that they felt it would look bad for him if that came out, given her suicide. What is the relationship with him from Rose? I mean, in all three cases, both the prosecution and the defence have sort of talked around, and the judge himself raised the matter of this coercive control being central to this case on all three women, Hayley Robb, Jill Robinson and Rose de Montmorency Wright. The judge has kind of asked the state, should he be considering it, or what was their position? And I think the state sort of said they weren't quite approaching it as coercive control, but they did accept that he had control over these women.
I would say he certainly had a level of control over Hayley.
Mm-hmm.
And it was he was the first to break free of the situation, and did her utmost to help. And that was quite clear. She's the only one that turned King's evidence.
She was going to give evidence, against him. And Hayley Robb has admitted that she met him that morning back at the house after he had delivered Katie to hospital, that she took clothes that he had taken off and he asked her to wash them, and also asked her not to tell anybody that he'd asked her that. And he told her that he was going to have a cold shower before he went back to the hospital.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. And she held on to that. Now, at the trial opening, there's body-worn footage of the police speaking to Hayley, and she's upset, as you would be, at the hospital. And she's trying to explain that Katie was already in the ambulance when she got there. Obviously, they haven't been able to talk at that point, because she arrives at the house when Johnny has come back after driving out. Supposedly, he was taking her to hospital, despite telling Hayley on the phone, call an ambulance. So she's not quite sure of that. That's fair enough. That would be understandable. But she's not made any reference whatsoever to Johnny beating Katie. And at that point, she was aware, because it was on his return trip from leaving his children with his mother, when he's going to come back and feign the surprise of finding Katie hanging. In that return trip, he's on the phone to her in a very long call, which even she later said was strange, because it was usually short and sweet, off the phone. I'm seeing you in an hour, so don't need to talk now. But in that, he said he'd given Katie a hiding because she'd been with a man on whatever Saturday night it was. And knew that, but no, she didn't know. And then she's asked, was she showing any signs of no mood? No, that was true. She wasn't. But this, that was literally within an hour of this happening. And as time went on and Katie sadly passes away, I don't know when she began to feel uncomfortable, but she definitely was keen to speak again to police. That said, she didn't come clean on the first few times she was interviewed. It was quite a bit down the line when she said, look, this is how it is. And she spilled the whole thing out about washing the clothes with Jill. She just said the whole thing.
Yeah. And she almost collapses his house of cards, doesn't she?
She collapsed everyone's house of cards, because she was in the car. She was at the house. At the house, but not in the house. She was at the wake and funeral. She was amongst them all. She was with Jill when the clothes were washed. So the minute Hayley pleaded guilty, it completely changed Jill's approach. Now, from what we hear, Jill admitted washing the clothes, but she didn't really see it as an issue. But at the sentencing, little bits more were coming out about, it had been put to Jill that he had been assaulted, Katie had been assaulted, and she was vague about that. She also said, she told the others, don't be talking about this, don't be talking about that. That is the conspiracy end of it. There is a little group around of it. And when Johnny's arrested, she's still in touch with the rest. Well, they're all in touch with each other, let's be honest. But she keeps in touch with him in jail. But they were all each other. I'd say by that stage quite frightened, all of them, because it was clear now this was not as it had been presented, and it began to unravel very, very gradually.
I mean, in the case of Hayley Robb, she's lured to become a bit of he's on an alibi, exactly. She's on the phone with him when he goes in and supposedly, surprisedly finds Katie having tried to commit suicide, and she's there, even though she's not physically there, because she's on the phone. She has been lured into that position as being an alibi from. Jill Robinson is also involved in the equestrian industry, as everybody really in this case is, some way or another. She's 42 years of age, so she's 7 years older than Johnny Creswell, but she also, it came out during sentencing, was having a relationship with him at some point. I think Hayley Robb's relationship with him is happening at the time that Katie Simpson is murdered. But Jill Robinson's one, it sounded like it was being portrayed as something that was in the past.
Yes, and I think that's fair, because it seems to have been quite a long way back. A long way back, but they stayed friends, and I think that was accepted. But she, I mean, I can remember his birthday was in January, and he was arrested in the March. And I remember she put a post up, because we were watching all this very carefully. She puts this post up after Katie's murder, but before he's arrested. Happy birthday to my torture of a best friend. Wouldn't change you for the world. So she's obviously very loyal to him. But I don't understand that at all. All the women were very loyal to him. So I just don't get that. And I remarked once before, why does he have these women round him? Where are there no men about? Does he not consort with other men? Is it just women? And is it just women who hang on his every word?
Mm-hmm. In the case of Rose de Montmorency Wright, she's not having a relationship with him, although she's living in the house along with him, Christina, who's often referred to as Nina in the court case hearings, and Katie. So these three women are living in the house with him at the time of Katie's death. Yes,
Rose is a bit of a complicated figure. She does seem to be very in awe of him. And she did say that. She looked up to him. She really liked him. It has been stated that she has never been in a sexual relationship with him. I don't know if she has or she hasn't. That's between her and him.
And it's been stated by her.
It's been stated by her that she's not. So we have to go with it. And there's nobody to say it. But she certainly was absolutely taken with him, fiercely loyal.
And she, of course, is the girl we're talking about that was there the night that he came back from that trip over the border with Katie, who said that she was in good form, who said she spoke to her the following morning and gave her a cup of tea. And who also said that she said not only had she fallen off a horse, but that there was a video of that fall and that it had been deleted. Was there ever evidence of that video?
There was no evidence of it, and there was no evidence that Kate had an injury to her jaw, as she stated. The one thing I would say is 19, absolutely taken with this man, who clearly she was prepared to try to do what she could. And I'm not defending her. I'm simply saying it from a naive perspective. But that also brings into question Johnny's ability to go to her and know that he can rely on her to cover for him in whatever way that was, assault or that she's spoken to Katie. I'm not sure. But there was an eagerness there. I think that can't be overlooked. She was so eager to be there for him. They all were to an extent, but Rose was the youngest. And when you listen to what she did, I mean, it wasn't even credible. You know, the things about, I videoed her, but I've lost it. You know, that's what a child would say.
Yeah.
I didn't, but they can't prove that they didn't, you know. So there was an element there, I think, that she was hooked into this. And she was with them there. She was familiar to them all. The children would have known her. You can go back a long way and you will find images of them all out together at races together, and Rose and Hayley, and they're all there. And hunt balls, for example, they're always all pictured together, all part of the team.
And these women never have another man with them at these things, do they? Are they all together with Johnny?
They're all together with Johnny. Now, Jill has a long-term partner. So she would have been doing her thing. But the others, all completely attached to Johnny. And I actually was at an event one night where there was Johnny and a table full of girls, women. There were no men at that table, just the women around him and Johnny. And it was a table of 10. So we had 1 man, 9 women, all sitting together, all giggling, all looking up to him as if he's some kind of god. And remarking on how funny he is and how handsome he is, and everybody just wanted that little crumb of his time. And it was really quite pitiful to watch, to be honest.
And you think the women knew about one another?
Oh yeah, I don't think there was ever any secret. If you want, I think I described it once that he would reach a pitch when he became tired of them, but he kept them around. He always had a way of enticing the next one in. I suppose you could say that he was always surrounded by young girls, and they thought he was funny, and he would have been very plausible, and that you'll make an international one day, you stick with me. And another thing that I find quite disturbing, many of these girls stopped education in order to go and work with him or for him. Come 20, so what's left for them? Little to no qualifications, and all they've had is probably 4 years hard graft in the stable. That's their future, and that's them still all in his circle. And there was seemingly nothing unusual about this. They all knew the setup, but they all seemed to want a little bit. As long as they got a little bit of his time, personal to them, they were okay about it.
I was looking for the other day in Derry to see, were they grieving or how are they feeling about his own death? Because, of course, his body was found at his bail address in Derry in April, cutting off any chance of justice for Katie Simpson. He basically took his own way out of that trial. Presumably, there would be inquests going forward into Katie Simpson's death and into his own death. But I was just trying to figure out if I could see anything like grief with these women who've been left to carry the can.
Well, I understand Hayley was very distressed during the court, and has been. Any time there's a court appearance, even by video link, Hayley was struggling very badly. But I think it's more, I think she got completely overwhelmed. As for any feelings about Johnny, I couldn't say. That's one that they'd have to be asked. There's certainly, their association with him has changed their entire life forever, and ended one life and his own. So they shouldn't have been in contact anyway. So because of the conditions, I just don't know. I'd say maybe once he was charged and remanded, that put a little bit of space between them, except for Jill, who stayed with him. And as time went on, it was probably, they were able to kind of push things back a little bit. Hayley remained very frightened of him. Well, she was the whistleblower over that part of it, and bring the other women. But I just don't understand how anybody, nothing and no one is worth this. Not only a death, once a murder has happened, that's it. Line drawn. But to actually risk your own future, your own mental well-being, your own career prospects, to lie for somebody, when really common sense would have told you it was never going to work. Okay, it nearly worked at the start, and that possibly is down to maybe they thought they could get away with it. But one thing that I've kept saying to myself is, Supposing he did get away with it, who was next? What other girl would have hanged herself or find herself in an awkward situation or find herself even at the back end of his hand? How many more victims would there have had to have been before authorities realised how really, really bad this was?
And I think, as we've spoken about, there's a lot of questions that need to be answered in this case, not least for that first PSNI investigation team, as regards the bail that he was out, and what else has gone on, because you get the feeling you're only scratching the surface here of a very dark individual who has probably touched more people than those that we've spoken about here today. And we are going to try and, scratch a little bit further and try and come to some understanding of what was going on in his life and around him over the coming months. We're going to hopefully, speak to people who knew him and maybe try and work out why many people turned a blind eye to what was going on. What is it about us as human beings that, in the face of this kind of an individual, we firstly believe them, and secondly, we sometimes look away as regards what they're doing. So, I'm hopeful that maybe if anybody wants to contact us here in Crime World, please do. And I think, Tanya, there's a lot more work to be done on this story.
There's a lot more to be done. I think one of the things I felt myself saying after Friday, okay, we're almost at the end of the trial. We're almost there. But when that trial finishes and the sentencing is over, the real questions have to start. We have to start getting to the root. Now, it's all very well. We ask the police and the policing board and all these myriad of people in authority. We're asking them questions constantly. They're stonewalling us. They're not giving us answers. They're not even giving us timelines. So I accept that there are investigations and procedures to go through. But this cannot be another 2 or 3 year process. This needs to be addressed sooner rather than later, because this cannot happen again. And people are going to need cast iron assurances. Now, last week, I dug out the Ombudsman's report into the Colin Howell and Hazel Stewart. Right, that was a suicide staged, murder staged suicide. There were loads of recommendations within that, which the PSNI had assured had been accepted and implemented. Well, I'm finding quite a few errors in Katie's case, but nobody wants to talk to me about it, which is probably understandable enough. But are there more people have been through this? You mentioned earlier people have come to me saying this wasn't suicide. You're quite right. I've had 4 people come to me from 4 corners of Ireland, and I have chased them up as best I can. But there is an element of, we aren't discussing this with you, and then you have to go back and get signed statements to say it's okay to discuss it with me. Nothing to discuss. Those people's heartache continues. And there's one in particular I'm very concerned about, where a woman was found dead in very suspicious circumstances. And this is why we tried to lobby the PSNI to start, it's a P1 form it's called, and it's police attending a sudden death, fill in this form. And there's questions on it like, has this person a history of drug abuse? It's all about that person's weaknesses. I would like a little box added in saying, are there any reports from or to or by this person of a domestic violence background? And they said, oh, well, we're not against it per se, but we're not going to do it. And this would simply, the last they said was, well, the police could write that in if they want. And who's presenting with this person who's dead? Partner, or the person who just may know something more. And are they going to volunteer that? Unlikely.
Tanya Fowles, thank you very much for your time today. And we will be talking again in the near future. I think that sentencing is actually June 14th. I think I said the 13th earlier in the show. And I would appeal to anybody, and I'm sure you would yourself, let's use this platform to try and, ask people to come to us with information around Jonathan Creswell and around the sort of the equestrian world that he moved in, because I think definitely there is a lot more to come with this story and a lot more investigation to do in regards to it. I was in court the other day. I know that there's a lot of people interested in doing things. I mean, look, you can just sit back and say this is a Netflix show. There's no doubt about it. I mean, this is an extraordinary story. You don't come across these that often in life or in journalism. And it has many elements, but it has very, very dark elements that really do need to be brought into the light. And some of those we've discussed today, and I'm sure some of them we will uncover as time goes on. But for the moment, thank you very much.
Thank you, Nicola.
I'm Nicola Tallant, and you're watching Crime World, a podcast about criminals, drugs and the underworld in Ireland and across the globe. Make sure you subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications so you can be the first to watch all our latest episodes. You can also listen wherever you get your podcasts.